There was a long-standing, intentional campaign from the Catholic Church to deny people plant medicine, to deny women spiritual leadership and authority, and to really remove all forms and tools that gave people access to divine remembrance on threat of death and torture.
And sometimes death.
Actual death, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Actual witch burning, as we discuss in episode 1. And what that's done to our nervous systems, what that's done to our psyches. And that original campaign, which wasn't about Christianity, that wasn't about the love of Jesus, the saving power of the Holy Spirit, the ability to die and be reborn inside of ourselves, the ability to be forgiven, the ability to find endless compassion. That was a targeted campaign to remove people's ability to remember their own divine nature outside of the very toxic religious teachings of the Catholic Church, which said you have a right to access God if you agree that your body is dirty, if you agree that sex is unholy outside of marriage and still probably pretty dirty, and if you never take plant medicine, right? And so these
if you don't engage in homosexual activity, or if you are not homosexual, which I think is germane to today's episode.
Exactly. And so the reclamation of this isn't just hedonism, although I think there's something in these pagan roots of like, celebrate life. Come on, like
it's
enjoy
temporary.
it while you're here, you know? Why take it so seriously? Like get your work done, move through the trauma. Yes, life can be painful. And you know what? Have the best time ever while you're here. So there's that element of yes to hedonism and the reclamation of sacred sexuality, of pussy, of the divinity of our bodies, and yes, of taking plant medicine sacraments to remember our own divinity is so essential to the remembrance of our own power, to the remembrance of our spiritual sovereignty. So you and I going to these sites is like, it's so potent, and I want everyone to have access to these practices. That's why I've been teaching this for 20 years, because it's like, yes, let's have better sex. Yes, let's have better relationships. But you know what's alienating us from ourselves, from our children, from our own bodies, from our own magic, is this long-standing toxic campaign that taught us to fear every single route to divine remembrance in ourselves outside of strict doctrinal teachings that had a real agenda around how to control people in the name of God rather than how to awaken people in the name of love.
And what's shocking to me is that I had no idea. Like before you came up with this idea of us taking this pilgrimage, before I read The Immortality Key, I didn't know there was a paleo-Christianity. I did not know that women were serving medicine, and that much of Western civilization as we know it was born out of that. I had no idea that there were actually temples and stadiums erected around not just feminine wisdom, but also the direct experience of the divine that every single human can have when they dance with this medicine that is from the earth.
Yeah.
And it is so liberating. It is so sovereignty inducing that it makes sense. Like, of course you would want to control that. Of course, like if you're trying to control a group of people, it's very hard to do that if they remember that they are God pretending to be human.
Yeah.
So I get it. I get it why we got divorced from these tools. And yet I'm so excited to dream into the ripple effect of this journey, of this podcast, of however many tens of thousands, hopefully hundreds of thousands of people who will hear this, that get to remember for themselves, like, oh, right. No one can keep me from the earth. No one can keep me from a plant. No one can keep me from the chemicals that God actually installed in my body that I managed to let someone else make me hate myself for it. No one can take that from us without actually our consent.
Yeah.
So it's been a very many thousands of years long, very deliberate campaign to make us hate these elements of ourselves or think that plant medicine is dangerous. Now, I think it is, good medicine, good measure to just acknowledge, yes, addiction. Yes, most people need a guide or some sort of set and setting. You need intention, you need integration on the other side. Like, I'm not suggesting that anyone just like just go drink a cup of ayahuasca with no guidance. But that's what these priestesses were doing. They were creating ritual and community and ceremony and integration and letting it be a full initiation.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I think is so exciting. And it's been such a big part of both of our dharmas, is initiating people into these lineages to help them to remember.
Yeah. And to really make a distinction between, entheogens and psychedelics, which bring light to the mind, which bring spiritual power back to you, right? And that those often don't come with addictive issues and problems. People don't have addiction problems with LSD. People don't have addiction problems with magic mushrooms and ayahuasca. Is it important to take it, exactly as you're saying, in a structured way, especially if you're a newbie? Is it important to have a skilled practitioner to guide you in it? Yes. And part of this journey is realizing that plant medicine existed in every single society on earth, but it was specifically eviscerated very early from the European traditions. And then what happened was, because this war on drugs started in Europe, denying the plant medicine sacraments from high priestesses, witches, and part of the witch burning, and Brian really outlines this well in the Immortality Key, part of the campaign against witches was to keep plant medicine out of the hands of people, so that people would not have access to mystical truth, that they themselves are Christ consciousness, that they themselves are the Holy Spirit, that they themselves are divine. And one of the things that touched me so deeply in that book was that they targeted older women specifically, because they held the recipes and they passed that magic and that wisdom on to the younger women, the younger witches. And so even ageism and this making of older women invisible, desexualizing them, is part of that targeted
Calling
campaign.
them dog-faced.
Yes.
Dehumanizing them.
Making witches scary. They eat babies in the woods,
They turn into cats and suck bloods of babies and are stewing frogs, which the frog part might be true. We can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. And the very real heartbreak of that. And one of the things that I realized is, back in the day when birth control would have been a real issue, right? Postmenopausal women would have been some of the most amazing sacred sexuality high priestesses, because they could have sex without pregnancy. They could channel their eros with incredible power. They would remember all of the wisdom codes and be able to transmit it. So embracing aging and wisdom and mature women is part of the reclamation of what has been taken from us for so long, right? And we can think like, oh, let's have drugs and sex and all of that. What's happened is, even the idea that that is lower than, that that's just some sort of party trick, is to not understand what a sacrament is, that you can take plant medicine and remember yourself as divine, that you can have a sacred sexuality ritual and remember yourself as the goddess, and that spirituality was made to be fun. Yes. That you could have a spiritual party on this earth, and why not before you die?
I mean, I will say we are world-class at spiritual parties.
We sure are.